can sit down, that'd be good. Just a quick introduction. In fact, Gareth will introduce himself, and he will introduce Mr. Farage after that. So thank you very much for your time. Gareth.
So, I'd like to welcome you all to the Welsh Valleys and the Gurnos. I'm Dr. Gareth Thomas. I'm the candidate for this area, and I'm here to just quickly discuss how poorly the Welsh Labour Assembly have been. For 25 years, we've had nothing but, well, nothing really, within the Welsh Valleys. So, and being somebody who's actually been in hospital several times and in A&E 3 times in the last 8 days, I can tell you that the waiting lists are anything from 4 hours to 30 hours. I waited for this broken leg for 30 hours, and my mother waited 11 hours not being able to breathe in hospital. So for the Welsh Labour to say that it's actually 20 minutes and 4 hours out, it's a complete joke. So there's much more I'd like to talk about, but I'm here to actually introduce the man himself, Mr. Nigel Farage.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, guess who's back? Back again. I did not for one moment think I'd be standing here and doing this ever again, but I am, and I'm doing it. But I come out of retirement, and I'm doing it because I genuinely feel that Britain is broken, that nothing actually works anymore, that we're broken economically as our national debt explodes, as our debt repayments are now over £90 billion a year, interestingly, the same amount as the education budget. But of course it's that generation that are going to have to pay for all of our mistakes for years to come. I feel increasingly we're broken socially, and it doesn't matter what crime statistics the government quotes at us, we all feel less safe on our streets, and I think we've reached a point now where most crime even goes unreported. And I'm in absolutely no doubt that we are in decline culturally. We've begun to forget who we are, what our history is, what we stand for. We've put up with the minds of our children from a young age right through university, frankly, being poisoned about what this country is and what it represents. And all of this would be manageable if there were some clear political solutions. But I think our politics is perhaps as broken as all of the other factors that I've listed. And I was very struck over the last couple of weeks. I've been involved in 2 7-way debates with party leaders and main representatives, one on the BBC, one on ITV, which descended really into a shouting match between Penny Mordaunt and Angela Rayner. And yet, when you listen to what they were arguing over, it seemed to me that the more they argued, the more they seemed the same. We're going through a breakdown of trust in politics, where manifestos, one after another, can keep making the same promises, and no one believes now, frankly, a word that they say, which is why today, specifically, is not a manifesto launch. Because if I say to you manifesto, your immediate word association is lie. And that is, I think, wholly unsurprising. There are also many millions of people out there, not just disappointed over manifestos, but a lot of Brexit voters, millions of Brexit voters out there, genuinely disappointed. They believe that by voting for Brexit, and actually the reason we saw the turnout on the scale that we did is that we'd actually get a grip on mass migration into Britain. We'd get back proper control of our borders, and none of that's happened. In fact, the very opposite has happened. So there are feelings of disenchantment there as well. They, of course, also run through our millions of small businesses who thought, well, at least the regulations, at least the rules will get easier. Some people say to me, well, Nigel, that's a failure of Brexit. Oh, no, it isn't. It's a failure of a sovereign government to implement the will of the people and, indeed, its own manifesto. And I also think there's a complete lack of leadership. I'm not, going to say personally abusive things about Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak. I'll leave that to the rest of the establishment to be rude about me, because I couldn't care less. It doesn't matter. I'm pretty used to it. I've even got used to people throwing things at me, but there we are. But there is a lack of leadership. People actually need some sense of being inspired, some sense of believing there's somebody up at the front that believes in what they say, says what they believe, and is going to show a way forward for the country. And I don't believe we have any of that either. So I've come back into this because I think there is now the most enormous gap that exists between the two big Westminster parties. And I say Westminster because it is very much Westminster and Oxford University thinking that dominates these parties. A huge gap between that and the conversations that I hear being had by families and people around the rest of the country. I could see it before the Brexit referendum. I could see this huge gap between our political class and the people. And the Brexit result, the shock of that result, showed us that it existed. I now believe that gap to be even bigger than it was before that referendum back in June 2016. So we've chosen to launch our contract with you. Now look, we are not pretending that we are going to win this general election. We are a very, very new political party, and we would have much preferred this election to take place in October or November. I personally was a bit crestfallen initially by what Rishi Sunak said when he announced July the 4th, but we are running very fast to catch up. And I genuinely believe that our campaign now has some momentum around the country. We've seen that in some of the opinion polls, and particularly encouraging and increasing, a rapidly increasing number of young people, and I'm talking the 18 to 24 year age group, are now coming to reform UK's cause. So this is not something with which we're going to govern the country. That's not possible in this election. Although this election is, for our party and for me, the first important step on the road to 2029. Our aim and our ambition is to establish a bridgehead in Parliament and to become a real opposition to a Labour government. And I say that because I can't see Sir Ed Davey providing real opposition, because actually on many fundamental policies, the Liberal Democrats and Labour, frankly, don't vary very much. And I certainly can't see the Conservatives providing opposition, because they don't agree on anything. They spend most of their days arguing among themselves, and they're split down the middle when it comes to policy. They're certainly split down the middle in terms of their attitude towards me. Goodness gracious. You had Suella Braverman virtually proposing political marriage over the course of the weekend, whilst at the same time, Lord Cameron, goodness me, they dragged him back. Talk about back again, crikey. And we had Lord Cameron generally being fairly abusive. And that sums up where the Conservative Party is. So we're a party that knows what we believe in. You know, we get the fundamental principles of what we're about. You know, we believe in the family, we believe in community, we believe in country. We know exactly what we believe in, and our aim is to provide clear, consistent and growing leadership during the course of the next Parliament, but not just in the Parliament, around the country too. And it's my aim that we turn this into a big, genuine mass movement of people, and I believe that that is actually highly achievable. So we've chosen to launch our contract in Wales, which seems highly, highly appropriate. After all, Labour have been in power here since 1997. So perhaps there are some lessons that we can learn from 25 years of Labour government in Wales, but perhaps what we might be looking forward to in just a few weeks' time when Sir Keir Starmer becomes our Prime Minister. In Wales, taxes are higher. Yes, they are. Council tax is higher, on average about £500 per median property, than it is in England. Interesting, isn't it, that when the question is being asked of Starmer and others on council tax in England, they've precious little to say. So the people in Wales pay more taxes, and spending per capita is higher in Wales than it is in England. There's more money being spent on you, on public services, than there is on the other side of the bridge. And it's interesting to think, isn't it, in those debates I've been in, all anybody seems to talk about is more investment in the NHS, more investment in our public services, by which they really mean they're going to spend more of your taxes. And perhaps that wouldn't matter if it led to better delivery. But the figures in Wales are truly astonishing. Gareth talked about this just a moment ago. You know, waiting times in Wales on the NHS are exactly 50% longer than they are on the other side of the bridge. Education, which has drifted in Wales rapidly in a leftward, PC, woke direction, and if you just look at the OECD tables on English, mathematics, any subject you like, you'll see that Wales has fallen further behind England. Not personally that I believe England's very good. And a Labour government in Wales reduces your freedoms, reduces your choices, ends right to buy and many other schemes which damage aspiration, particularly for young people who want to get on. And of course, the crowning glory of 25 years of Welsh government in Wales, the imposition of 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. Well, it led, didn't it, to one of the most astonishing petitions you've ever seen. The percentage of Welsh people that signed that petition. Well, I mean, I've never seen a petition actually quite like it, although, of course, we're rather used to all of that with ULEZ and Mr Khan up in the other end of the country in London. So it gives us some idea that in terms of outright policy, Labour's not very different to the Conservatives. It's just more incompetent. It just wastes even more money than Conservative governments do. But here's the point about things going so badly wrong in Wales over 25 years. There's been no proper, clear, consistent opposition voice. Frankly, the Conservatives in the Senate have been feeble, to say the very least. And that is the argument. Wales really gives us the perfect example of what I'm talking about. We need to have good, strong opposition that can mobilise people in very, very large numbers. So we know what we stand for, we know what we're for. We're for controlled borders, we're for promoting genuine economic growth. We're for helping the little guy. You know, millions of men and women out there trying to get on, trying to do their own thing, and yet a Labour and Conservative party that only ever listen to the giant global corporates. We're about trying to restore some trust in politics. You might dislike what we say. You might not want to vote for what we say, but at least we do say what we mean. And we want to have an absolutely radical rethink of the way in which our public services are run. And yes, that does include the National Health Service. It's been very, very difficult to have any conversation about the NHS over the course of the 25 years that I've been involved in politics without someone pointing and screaming, you want to privatise it. All we want is an NHS that is free at the point of delivery that actually works. And how we get there, frankly, I don't think most people could give a damn about. So they're the things that we're going for. And of course, we would like the state to take far less of our money than it's currently doing, and will go on taking more and more, I'm sure. I've said from the start, this should be the immigration election. I have no doubt about that. I think the population explosion, the impact that it's had on people's lives, is the dominant issue. How can you discuss NHS waiting lists without discussing the fact that the population has risen by 6 million people since David Cameron came to power back in 2010? How can you talk about a shortage of housing where we need to build one new dwelling every 2 minutes just to cope with current levels of net migration? How can you talk about any of these things? So we believe this is what we should be talking about. But of course the others would rather not discuss it. The Conservatives are attempting for a 5th manifesto in a row to tell us they'll reduce the numbers. But then they told us in 2010 and 2015 and 2017 they'd reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. They promised in 2019, with Brexit controls, we'd massively reduce the levels of unskilled labour coming into Britain. Well, it's running at getting on for net 750,000 a year. And when you look at those that have come and stayed, it's incredible to think that 1 in 30 people on the streets of Britain today have come here in the last 2 years alone. Never before in history have we ever seen literally anything like it. And as for Labour, well, it's extraordinary that they launched their manifesto with their 6 key priorities, not even mentioning immigration, not even mentioning the impact on people's lives. So we want to have a proper, honest debate about it, and we believe that an overall freeze on net migration numbers is what we need for a few years to help us at least try to catch up. We also have to say it's only right and proper that you only get benefits in this country once you've been here for 5 years, obeyed the law and paid your taxes. Again, these are policies that are discriminatory in favour of British taxpayers and British people. If you go to work in Australia, you won't get benefits or dental care. You'll have to pay into the system for years and obey the law. We're doing what a good, sensible country should do, recognising that the first duty of a British government is to its own people and not to anybody else. And as far as Dover's concerned, well, I was going out into the Channel 4 years ago, day after day, filming the small dinghies coming, predicting that vast numbers would arrive unless we changed policy and started deporting people who came illegally, something, by the way, that we used to do up until 2010. You know, the last years of the Labour government, we were deporting up to 40,000 people a year who'd come illegally. We've lost our way. And part of the reason for that is a court in Strasbourg that's become increasingly activist. They've even interfered recently with the Swiss government, telling them they have an obligation under international law to maintain net zero policies. Well, the Swiss government have decided to ignore them, but we think the only way to really fully restore sovereignty, to decide who can come in, who can stay, is by leaving that European Court of Human Rights. It is completely out of date. It's not serving the purpose for which we signed up to back over 70 years ago. But of course, this all leads on to the cost of living crisis. Rents are up by, on average, 20 to 25% across the whole UK since 2021 alone. Is it any wonder, with an exploding population, that rents are going up? So a freeze on the overall numbers would at least begin to reduce the pressure. And of course, one of the biggest bills that families face, and the lower your overall income is, the bigger this particular bill matters, it's energy. It's energy. It's whether you're filling your car or whether you're paying for your heating. And we have been following net zero policies, championed by Mrs May, enthusiastically embraced by Boris Johnson, and now being virtually copied by the Labour Party. We're pursuing net zero policies that are self-destructive. Just look at what it's doing to industry. What's happening to steel making in South Wales? It's going. But somehow government thinks that's good because we reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we emit. But we don't. We just export the production of that CO2 as the goods are made somewhere else. In this case, I'm particularly talking about primary, not secondary steel. And then we import the goods back into our country. So we want to get rid of the subsidies that are paid to green energy companies by loading taxes on the electricity bills of everybody in this country, and we've been doing this now for the best part of 20 years. But we also have to try and find out a way that people can be better off. National government, opposition, much of the media seems to want to bow down to the god of GDP. Our gross domestic product rose last year. Isn't that great? Well, if you massively increase the population, it's perhaps not surprising, with more people, that the overall size of the economy would grow. But here's the key. Coinciding with record levels of migration into Britain, we have now seen 6 consecutive quarters of GDP per head falling. We're getting poorer. The mass import of cheap, unskilled foreign labour may work for your big multinational company who want as cheap a labour as possible and couldn't give a damn about the social consequences, but it's not working. And we very much want to be a party that is on the side of working people. And that is why I think this is perhaps the most transformative thing in this document, which, by the way, has been so excellently worked on for months and produced by Richard Tice. He deserves the credit for this, not me. I'm a Johnny-come-lately when it comes to this document. But I think the most innovative thing, policy that we've put out in here, is to raise the level at which people start paying tax to £20,000 a year. Why? Well, number one, it would take 7 million people out of the tax system altogether. A devilishly complicated tax system. That would be a good thing, of course, for those on low pay. Be a good thing for many pensioners, who, if they have a small private income, supplementing their state income, are being dragged into the tax system. Not a very good policy for local accountants, obviously, because they love the complexity. Not a good policy for civil servants, because we could probably get rid of a few with a mass simplification like this, but also a huge incentive, a massive incentive to get people back to work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that right at the end. We also think inheritance tax, and it depends where you live and what property values are, and this is not as relevant here as it perhaps is in the home counties. But, you know, an average semi-detached house in South London is now, when the parents die, attracting, inheritance tax. This was never designed for people in the middle. It was always designed for those at the upper income scale. So we'd go to £2 million on an estate before anybody paid inheritance tax. So simplification matters to us. But it's wealth creation. Labour have launched their manifesto talking about wealth creation. But I didn't see a single thing in there that would create wealth. And that is because our political class is stuck in the global corporate mindset. I saw this in 20 years in Brussels, where it was the influence of big businesses with their lobby that dominated the way, totally dominated the way that politicians thought. This sort of unholy triumvirate, if you like, of big business, big banks, and big politics. And we genuinely are on the side of the 5.5 million men and women out there running their own small companies, acting as sole traders, who feel government is their enemy. And it's their enemy whatever the colour of the rosette. Just look at these crazy IR35 rules. How difficult they've made it for self-employed people right across the United Kingdom. Think about what they did to corporation tax last year. putting it up by 30%, and being surprised that many small and medium businesses now don't have as much capital, perhaps, to reinvest, or as much incentive to make profit as they had before. And the other group of people who feel betrayed by the lack of Brexit delivery, there's the broader population who voted for lower numbers, but there's the business community who genuinely thought and hoped that by getting rid, by streamlining so many European Union rules, that their lives would get easier. They haven't. They haven't. The government blames COVID. Because of COVID, we couldn't do these things. Well, I would argue they didn't have to lock us down repeatedly. Once was probably more than enough. But we have not. And you know, Rishi Sunak and others promised they'd get rid of thousands of EU laws. They simply haven't done it. And actually, in some sectors, the regulatory authorities in Britain have made life for men and women running small businesses even harder than it was during the time of EU membership. So we believe that genuine economic growth doesn't come from half a dozen giant multinationals. It comes from the simultaneous actions of hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, deciding they're going to have a go. And of course, these people don't benefit on holiday pay, they don't benefit on sickness pay. These actually really, economically, these men and women are the heroes of the country. They deserve encouragement, and the more people that do it, the greater the wealth that we will create. And we need wealth. Of course we need wealth. And one of the areas where we need to spend money is defence. I can't think the world has been in a more perilous place at any point in my lifetime. I was born after the Cuban Missile Crisis, just to clarify. Only just. And frankly, this balmy idea of saying we're going back to national service. Oh, no, we're not. All we're going to do is take 30,000 young people and at vast expense give them a year's training. What we ought to be doing is saying, look, there were 100,000 people in the army in 2010. There are 72,000 people in the army now. Let's not recruit 30,000 part-timers. Let's actually recruit 30,000 people full-time to be in the services, and a similar principle, of course, would apply across the Navy and the Air Force. And in terms of expenditure, look, we think government should push on to 2.5% and then 3% of GDP as quickly as they possibly could. I think we've neglected defence very, very badly. Now, in terms of our public services, be it policing, be it prisons, be it the National Health Service, there's certainly a radical cultural rethink that needs to go on. I've been fascinated going around the country in the last couple of weeks, talking to people, parents particularly, about their real fear of knife crime, growing fear of knife crime. And this is not from the 18-pluses, it's going right down in the teenage years. And we have no doubt that an approach to policing such as stop and search, and don't worry if you're called prejudiced or you're doing something wrong, actually you'll save lives. We're going to have to get much tougher on low-level crime. And I mean shoplifting. I mean, can you believe it? You could all go out and shoplift. It's fine. Up to £200 you can nick and no one's going to prosecute you. So I think a different approach culturally across crime and policing. And with the big one, the NHS. Look, what we are going to campaign for is a genuine radical rethink. You know, we all grew up loving the NHS, being deeply grateful to the NHS. It was there and a fantastic thing. And I've been trying to make many of these arguments, actually, I've been trying to make for well over a decade, that we have to have a rethink. And I think perhaps back in 2015, when I led a different party in a general election, perhaps I was just a bit ahead of the curve. Perhaps I was saying things that people didn't want to listen to. But I get the sense that they are listening now. We are not getting bang for our buck, and there's a growing level of disenchantment that the health service simply isn't fit for purpose in the way that and not just the way that it used to be, the way that we want it to be. So let's look at other funding models. Let's look at how the French do it. Let's be radical in our thinking. And my final point's on benefits. Now, it's quite easy for those in work and working damn hard to say lazy scroungers on benefits. It's the sort of conversation you hear in the pub. But actually, there are a lot of people on benefits who do not want to be on benefits. They want to go back to work. But the system massively disincentivises this. Because if they work for more than 16 hours a week, they start to lose the benefits, and they'll lose more benefits than they'll earn in going out and getting money. There is a trap, a benefits trap. And that isn't good for people economically, and it certainly isn't good for people psychologically. And that is where raising the level at which we start paying tax to £20,000 a year really, really matters. This is something that would make work pay. That would make a massive difference to our societies, massive difference to nearly every one of our communities. And of course, for those on benefits who see it as a holiday, quite extraordinary, isn't it, that you could have an online consultation and be signed off on the sick with depression. And that, by the way, I'm not knocking those that genuinely have mental health issues. Of course I'm not. But what I am saying, it's ludicrous that that can happen with an online consultation. And we want to make it clear that for people that are thought to be fit and able-bodied, once they've had 2 offers of a job, if they don't take one of those jobs, they lose their benefits. And I think, again, that is something that working people would agree with. That outlines the broad principles of our contract. As a party, we're unashamedly patriotic. As a party, we believe that British history is a great thing and should be taught properly and with fairness and with balance. But as a party, we're radical. We're radical in terms of the way we want to change public services. We're radical in terms of the way the education system in this country needs to operate. We're radical in terms of our simplification of the tax system. We're radical in terms of our view on issues such as the electoral system, the House of Lords, our right to a referendum. And you can be both. You can be traditional and radical at the same time. Because we're proud of who we are, but we feel at the moment politics and government isn't fit for purpose. We want real, genuine change to give us a better, brighter and stronger future. And I promise you all, this is step one. Our real ambition is the 2029 general election. But this is our first big push. I've been back in this job for a couple of weeks. I sense we're doing really rather well. Thank you. Now, thank you. Now, I was asked to do the easy bit today. I was asked to give you the vision. I'm Mr. Nice today. Mr. Nasty is Richard Tice today, who's going to tell you what taxes are going to go up and where the savings are going to come from. Richard, thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you. Well, a very good afternoon. It's great to be here. Rarely been introduced as Mr. Nasty. So, all these bold plans, and they are exciting, and they are attracting huge appeal out on the stump. Something's going on out there. It's quite remarkable. Word is spreading about Reform UK, and as Nigel just touched on, some of these key policies are really gaining ground. So how do we pay for them? Well, I talked about some of it last Monday. But here's the thing. Lots of people in the media say, oh, it's unfunded tax cuts. No, let's get this real. It's unfunded spending. That's what's got us into a right pickle. Our fiscal deficit in the last year to April, no one talks about it. We spent about 120 billion more than we earned. There's a few key big things here. And unlike some of the other people in their plans, other parties, they're not honest with you about the costs and how you're going to pay for it. We are, because it's set out in this contract. So last week, I spoke about this issue of the Bank of England paying your taxpayers' cash on all the money that was printed. And it's about 35 billion a year based on current interest rates. It's quite hard to explain, but here's the point. It's about £700 per year. You know you're making progress when within 2 hours of finishing that press conference last week, I was attacked by none other than the lobby group for the big banks, the vested interests, who seem to think that they have a right, the big banks, to make big profits on the money that was printed to save them going bust. Really? Let me repeat. We are the real party on the side of the workers, not the Labour Party, what I call the cafe latte Labour Party, that's on the side of big business. So that's the first thing. When they printed all this money, they didn't tell us that when interest rates went back up, it would cost us an absolute fortune transferring our money to the big city banks. They didn't tell us that, but that's what's happened. Unfunded spending. The second big item, of course, is the cost of net zero. So when Theresa May had a 90-minute debate back in, I think it was 2019, 90 minutes to sign up to net zero, put it in legislation, no one said, well, hang on, how much is this going to cost? What's the spending? The truth is, even if they had that debate, they wouldn't have had a clue. You've got people like the Climate Change Committee saying it's 1.2 billion. You've got the OBR saying it's 1.4 billion. You've got the National Grid, perhaps being a little bit more honest, saying it's 3 trillion. Sorry, those are trillion numbers. The numbers are so big. 1.2 trillion, 1.4 trillion. The National Grid says it's 3 trillion. Impossible to work out what that means. 3 trillion? I mean, is it 100,000 per household? No one talked about this spending, the cost to get there. Apparently it's going to save the planet and therefore the cost is irrelevant. Really? This is real money. This is real cash. And it's all of our cash. And apparently it's going to be good for the environment. Well, where I'm campaigning to be elected, one of the big debates is the implications, the consequences, which is happening now all over the country, of this drive towards offshore renewable energy. But you've got to transmit that electricity. How are we going to transmit it? Oh, I know. Big 50-metre pylons going hundreds of miles across the English countryside. How's that good for our environment? And who's going to pay for it? So all of those who voted for this, they didn't tell us that, did they? They didn't tell us how much it would cost and how much it would blight the English countryside, our environment. How's that good for the environment? We reckon that if you scrap net zero, then the saving to the taxpayer every year for the next 25 years would be in the order of £30 billion per year. What is that? That's about £600 per adult. That's what that is. 600 quid per adult. So 1,200 quid for a two-person household every year. This is real money. It's your money, and they didn't tell you. They deliberately misled the British people about the cost implications of net zero. And as Nigel quite rightly said, all you're doing, you're not reducing global CO2, you're just shipping it somewhere else. And we're the mugs that are paying for it. And it's got to stop. And we're the only party that has the courage to say, this is unfunded spending, it's costing us a fortune, it's not going to save the planet, and it's got to stop. 30 billion a year. Now the third big item, and again some of the press will attack us, one of the mainstream broadcast journals, newspapers this morning tried to do an analysis of some of these costs. The thing was though, because they didn't want to actually tell us the truth about these numbers, they just talked about in generalities. But we all know taxes have gone up to record levels, and yet the quality of the outcomes of public services has declined. That can only mean that we're spending money badly. If taxes had gone up and the quality of public services had improved no end and waiting lists had dropped to zero, you might say, well, money's being spent well. So when I talk about waste in public services, waste in public spending, particularly in things like the NHS, I always get contacted within a couple of days by nurses, anaesthetists, surgeons, doctors who say, Richard, thank heavens, someone is actually telling it as it is. The waste is everywhere. It's extraordinary. And I've got a very simple slogan. It's what we do in business. And we come from the world of business. We're fixers, we're sorters, we're doers, we make things happen. It's very simple. You've got to cut out the waste from the back office and invest it in the front office. That's how you grow a business. That's how you improve the surplus that you make. That's how you improve the quality of your product. And that's what we've got to do with the public sector. Instead, we learn that since about 2019, there's an extra 600,000 people working in the public sector, but productivity's gone down. So we have to be honest with people. And in the same way that all of us struggling with our bills at home, we're saying, well, I've got to save £5 in 100. But you've still got to pay the bills, the rent, the mortgage, the food. So you've got to buy more wisely. That's what we do in business. Nigel talked about small businesses. We're all looking at our bills. And in business, you say to your spending managers, folks, we've got to cut the cost, but we've still got to provide the product. So you've got to save £5 in 100. And bluntly, that's your job. And if you don't, you're fired. I know it's tough, but these are tough times. And when the going gets tough, guess what? The tough get going. That's the reality. And that's what's got to happen in the public sector. When they introduced the Equalities Act in 2010, and all well-meaning, well-intended things like diversity, inclusion and equality, it sounds lovely. But they never told us about the cost of it, did they? They never said it's going to cost hundreds and hundreds of millions every year, and productivity is going to go down as you move towards mediocrity. So I simply don't accept the nonsense that's talked by those in the Treasury and in the main two parties who say you can't save any money in the public sector. It is utter nonsense. We know it's nonsense because of those extra 600,000 people. We know it's nonsense because the size of the cake that Nigel's talked about in the NHS, it's up to about 11% of the size of the cake, and yet waiting lists have gone down. That is the proof that we can spend money better. We can save money in the back office and invest it in the front office. And I know it sounds glib, but the numbers are big. But if you save £5 in 100 in wasteful public sector spending everywhere, the quangos, the commissions, the local authorities, the government departments, it soon adds up. It's 50 billion quid plus or minus. These are big numbers. Per adult, it's about £1,000 a head. This is real cash with which we can completely transform the way we run our economy, and as Nigel touched on, the tax cuts, in order that actually we can make work pay, we can make businesses grow, we can encourage risk-taking. Let's remember, the biggest risk in life is never taking one. That's what small business folk do. Those are the big savings. On top of that, if we get 1 million people off benefits back into work, there's huge billions of savings. Oh, another bugbear of ours, HS2. I mean, the Prime Minister scrapped the top end. Prime Minister, well, if you're going to do a job, for heaven's sake, just do it properly. Just scrap the rest of it. Billions more there. Foreign aid. We know there's huge amounts of waste in foreign aid. We could reduce the amount we spend on foreign aid, saving another 6 billion or so every year. These are huge savings. This is a completely different way of running our economy. I believe it's achievable. We know it's achievable. That's why we put this forward. And we know the current status quo, the main two parties tinkering at the edges, there's no growth. You can't tax your way out of this crisis. We've got to grow our way out of this crisis. And this, folks, is how you pay for it. We've got to stop paying the interest on the printed money. We've got to scrap net zero. And we've got to cut out the waste in the back office of the public sector and invest it in the front line. If we do these things, then we can make this country grow again. We can afford to invest where we need to invest, in growth, in tax cuts, in defence, and all the other things in this great contract. So I commend this to you. Reform UK commends this to you. This is how we pay for it. It can be done. No one's saying it's easy. Truth is, life isn't easy. But if you're not prepared to get tough with wasteful spending, then we are heading towards a very bad place. That's what we're about. That's what Reform UK is about. And that's why Reform UK is going up in the polls. Word is spreading. People love common sense policies and a common sense approach to what we do. I commend this contract to you. Thank you very much. So, you've had the nice bit, you've had the challenging bit, and then the next plan is we're going to take some questions from the press. There are then one-to-ones. We're also going to, it's very important with a contract is not valid, of course, unless you sign it. So we will be signing the contract in due course. But Nigel, let's do some questions. So, who's first from the question? Alex.
Thank you very much indeed. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Hello, Mr. Farage, Mr. Tice, Alex Forsyth, BBC News. You've got 24 pages here. You talked about the costings, you talked about the spendings, but some of the stuff in here, a freezing immigration, NHS waiting lists down to 0, more police officers. You accuse other parties of broken promises, but isn't this really a list of unrealistic promises, a wish list rather than a serious plan? Aren't you doing what you accuse others of, which is chucking out a whole lot of things that sound popular and hope you get votes that you never plan to deliver on?
It is a promise that this is what we're going to campaign for over the course of the next 5 years. These are the principles, these are the issues. Richard's talked about the way we can pay for things, but this is what we're going to campaign for. I said at the very start, we are not going to be in government this time round. But we are going to provide a voice of opposition, and this outlines where we're going to challenge Labour. On many of these things that we're discussing in this document, I mean, Labour don't even want to talk about these issues. So no, I think we've laid out very clearly where we stand, philosophically, ideologically, on a number of things, and this is what we're going to fight for. So no, I see no inconsistency with that whatsoever. It's very different, isn't it, to promising you'll reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year in consecutive manifestos, and then they're not even trying to achieve it.
Chris Hope.
Chris Hope, GB News. Two quick questions. You're here targeting Labour, you're here in Merthyr Tydfil, but why are your such policies aimed at the Tory voters? Describe for us a typical reform voter. And to Richard Tice, on page 23, it says that you're bringing up tax to 40% of GDP more than Labour. Why is that? Or is that wrong?
Well, hold a second. I mean, you talk about reform voters or reform members. A very large number of reform members are former members of the Labour Party. And they've been on that journey that millions did in this country, you know, from sort of 2010 on to now. I guess Lee Anderson being perhaps a very, very good example of that. And I think actually what we're talking about here in terms of giving those at the lowest end of the income scale or those trapped on benefits, we're trying to find some answers, some solutions and things we can campaign for to try and make lives absolutely the best they can be for those at the bottom of the spectrum. Now, whether you regard that, Chris, as being a Labour policy or a Tory policy, I don't know. We just take the view that it's a right policy, it's the correct policy. And I actually think, what's interesting is immigration, the subject's always considered to be a right-of-centre debate. Across Europe, increasingly, it's something that parties on the left of politics are talking about as well. So I don't think it's sensible to pigeonhole much of what's in there as being Labour or Conservative. But I do believe, as Richard said, there's an awful lot of common sense. And these are the things we're going to campaign for, and I think they're going to gain widespread, considerable public support.
Thank you. Just on your second point, Chris, yes, there's a simple expression here, which is that smart tax cuts that create growth pay for themselves over and over and over. And if we get higher growth, then guess what? You get higher tax revenues. And the compounding effect of that over a 5 to 10 to 15-year period is absolutely massive. And there's not enough discussion in this country about the benefits of growth. And there's no idea from the main two parties about that. So what we put in there is an estimate. If you grow the economy by an extra 1 to 1.5%, then the extra revenues, tax revenues, would be about 10 billion. Look, that's the reality. We've got to talk about growth and the benefits. Who's next? Sam Coates.
Sam Coates, Sky News. Mr Farage, in your contract, you're proposing to spend an extra £141 billion every year. That's about 30 times the amount that Labour are going to spend. So they're going to spend 10 times the amount the Tories, 3 times the amount that Liz Truss promised to spend. You did say that you weren't going to win the next election, but the scale of this, it's deeply unserious, isn't it?
That's right, it's radical. It's fresh thinking. It's outside the box. It's not what you're going to get for the current Labour and Conservative parties, who are virtually indistinguishable, frankly, from each other. Is this radical fresh thinking on economics? Yes. Is it radical fresh thinking on constitutional change? Yes. Is it very radical change on the way our education system is currently bringing up our young children? Yes. Britain is broken. Britain needs reform. That's what we're here for. That's what we're trying to do. And Richard has also suggested some very interesting radical changes to pay for it. We're unashamedly radical. We want change. This isn't working, and nobody has got political arguments in this election to... I mean, it's basically more of the same. It is going to be a Labour government. We all know that. I said that 2 weeks ago when I came back, when Richard passed me the ball or the hand grenade that was fizzing, or whatever it was, and I said that 2 weeks ago that Labour are going to win. This is about who the opposition's going to be, and what we're talking about is what we're going to fight for over the course of the next 5 years. So, no, there's no rowing back from me, no apologies from me on this whatsoever. This would represent a fundamental, transformational change within the British economy.
But to be clear for those who are watching on the live stream, Sam, yes, there's some series of spendings, costs, but we also outline all of the savings that I've just touched on there. So it's very important that you look at both sides of the coin. As Nigel says, it's not working. People are getting poorer. Unless we change course, we are heading towards disaster. That's the point. Who's next? Yes.
Hi, Emilio from Politico. I've got a question for Mr Farage. One of the main criticisms of you is that it's all well and good being a kind of protest voice, because it's not about hard governance, and even leading the opposition, like you're saying you want to do, is actually a much more complex thing. It requires delicate management, it requires negotiation and compromise. And although you might not like their decisions, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, they both have experience running enormous, complex organisations that require some of that compromise and negotiation. What do you say to people who might like you and think that you talk a lot of sense, but don't believe that you've got the attitude or the skill for the compromise and management required to be an actual opposition leader or even PM rather than just a protester?
All right, well, look, I think, we all have our personalities. Yes, of course, I'm fairly decisive. I have an opinion. Doesn't mean I don't listen, doesn't mean I don't change my mind, doesn't mean I don't respect others, doesn't mean I can't work as part of a team. And many people I work with in politics, I've worked with for many, many years. So I understand the point about compromise. But equally, you have to have a vision. You have to have a goal. And I've had that. I mean, this time 30 years ago, I was campaigning in the Eastleigh by-election in Hampshire, all right? And I did it not because I wanted a career, far from it. In fact, in the end, I gave up a good career because I wanted to pursue goals. I wanted to pursue things that I believed in. And I've come out of retirement to do this for a similar reason, albeit it's not, as some would see it, the narrower point of self-government outside the European Union, although I never believed it was, but some saw it that way. This is about the way in which the country is run, the way in which the country is managed. So, yes, I can compromise if I need to. But I also think I've had some long-term views of politics, of society, that have been right. So, yes, I'm very confident. I'm very confident in what I say and what I believe in. And I think to give leadership, you actually need to have that.
I'll take a couple more. Yes, the lady there. Hi.
Hi, Catherine Jones from S4C. You're here today in one of Wales's most deprived areas.
Are you giving people here hope at this election, or is it just a list of things to hate, from immigration to devolution?
That question is very closely linked to the previous question. In this sense, this is not a protest document. This is not a protest vote. And it's been a common misconception with all the campaigns that I've run over the years. I remember sort of in 2011, 12, 13, you know, every by-election we'd hear, well, that was a shock result. A shock result for UKIP. The protest vote is growing. It was always a protest vote, as people are suggesting this is a protest vote. When you actually poll people that voted for parties I led back then or now, when you poll them and ask them, is it a protest vote? They say, no, it's not a protest vote. We believe in what they're saying. We think they've got positive policy solutions for the future. So yes, of course, we're in an area that has done relatively badly compared to many others, and we genuinely believe the biggest beneficiaries of the ideas we're outlining here will be people, and I repeat the point, trapped on benefits who don't want to be there, or on low incomes, or with energy bills that they're struggling to pay. There is a lot more here, far more here, for those at the lowest end of the income scale than there is for anybody else.
Hi, thank you. Gurpreet Narwan from Sky News. You say you want to find £50 billion of public sector waste every year. That's an enormous figure. Where exactly do you plan to find those savings? And is this just code for cuts to public services?
Well, cuts to public sector, I mean, frankly, they're never in the office anyway, are they? I mean, it's work from home. You know, pop into Whitehall a couple of days a week. No, I mean, Richard's made the point at length, eloquently earlier. If you're running a company and things are tight, you say to your managers and middle managers, right, I'm sorry, this is the way it is. You've got to cut £5 and 100. In fact, in tough times, it might be £10 and 100, or £20 and 100. And you have to find a way of doing that without affecting the product that we're selling to the public. This is not unrealistic in any way at all. And the sheer bloating of the quangos, the bloating of the civil service that has taken place even since, well, let alone since 2016, since 2019, is just astonishing. And that's what we've had with the Conservative government. We've had big government, we've had restriction of individual choices, we've had high taxation, record immigration, and all we're going to get with Labour is more of the same. So, yeah, some of these things we're proposing are tough, but look, you know, the accumulated national debt is now 2.7 trillion. It was just under 1 trillion when the Tories came to power. We simply cannot go on like this. We're skint. I mean, who else would dare say that in this campaign? We're skint. We're in real trouble. And the nonsense of economic argument we hear from Rachel Reeves and Jeremy Hunt never acknowledges the fact that both of them are expected to be in deficit next year by yet another £100 billion. So we're saying, let's face reality. We have to have a slimmed down public sector, and we have to do that whilst maintaining services.
Last question, ITV. And then we've got some one-on-ones, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Harry Hilton, ITV News. You're proposing in this contract tax cuts, £88 billion worth, on a scale that might even cause Liz Truss to raise her eyebrows. And the savings that you say will pay for these are questionable. Isn't this exactly the sort of economic policy that would cause financial markets to freak out?
No, I don't think it is. And to compare it to Liz Truss is wrong. Yes, Liz Truss wanted to talk about growth, but nowhere in her proposal could we see cuts on the one hand to compensate for the giveaways on tax. That was the fundamental mistake that Kwasi Kwarteng made with that budget. We're not making that. And sure, you can question our numbers, but actually I think, in particular, what Richard has brilliantly illustrated, with the interest being paid to the banks not being my favourite set of organisations, I can tell you. And this is something that is now picking up more and more economic approval, former deputy governors of the Bank of England and others saying Richard's on the right track with this. So no, and in terms of financial markets, well, of course, the French bond market is very interesting this morning if you look at it. Look, I think an idea that says we want to regenerate the British economy an idea that says we want to bring back manufacturing to our economy, an idea that says we have to accept the fact, whatever our view, we'll be using oil and gas until 2050, so why not produce our own in this country rather than importing it? I think all of these things actually would be quite bullish for financial markets, even if there was initially a bit of a political shock. But look, let's be realistic. I repeat the point. We ain't going to win this election. This is our first big election. But we are well on our way, if you believe the MRP polls, etc. at the weekend, we're well on our way to establishing, that bridgehead in the House of Commons. And those MPs that we do elect will actually have on their shoulders the hopes and optimism of many, 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 many millions of people. Be in no doubt, this campaign is going well. There is momentum out there. You only have to look at things like social media numbers to realise how well we're doing with a budget that's a fraction of the others. And that's because we've got, we may be, compared to Labour and Conservative right now, we may well be a relatively small party, but we've got a very, very big message.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to do some one-on-ones, and appreciate you all coming. First of all, we're going to sign the contract, and we'd like some candidates to come beside us, behind us.
Well, we'll just sign one of them, sure.
We'll just sign one of them,
yeah.